TV.
Welcome everybody, my name is Leon Verrooy and this is a new episode of Playgrounds TV In Depth. And today with a very special guest. He's on my wish list for a long time and finally we have him here on the table of our studio, Wilbert Plijnaar.
You better have a look at this, sir.
Commercial flight.
No, too fast, sir.
One of our own?
Air Force has nothing scheduled.
We've got ourselves a bogey.
It might seem crazy what I'm about to say. Sunshine, she's here, you can take a break. I'm a hot air balloon that could go to space. With the air, like I don't care, baby, by the way. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Here come bad news, talking this and that. Well, give me all you got and don't hold it back. Well, I should probably warn you, I'll be just fine. No offense to you, don't waste your time. Here's why. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what I'm light as a feather. I'm light as a feather. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high to bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, bring me down. Can't none bring me down. Your love is too high to bring me down. Can't none bring me down. I said, clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like that's what you want to do. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like a room without a roof. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you feel like happiness is the truth. Because I'm happy. Clap along if you know what happiness is to you. Because
Welcome Wilbert.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's really great because sometimes I see you in the chat of Playgrounds, but now you're actually in my studio, and it was a big wish of mine because you are part of quite a big chunk of cultural heritage on comics and animation. So I have a shitload of images and all kind of scenes that you were part of. But before we go to that, can you tell us a little bit about like how that you got involved in this comic and animation industry?
Wow. Well, I had an uncle. That's where I started, basically. Well, first of all, I would always tell stories, and I would do it with Lego. And instead of other people building houses or whatever, I would do vaudeville shows when I was a kid. I would build sets, and then with curtains, and then I would go really low on the table like that, and then I would imagine some kind of snip revue or something, which I'd seen as a kid.
With Lego. Cool.
Yeah, with Lego. And then, you know, I was drawing, and I yeah, just read the comic magazines, of course, the Robbedoes and Pep and Shores and so on. And then at one point, my uncle had a publishing house, but he published sex magazines, which was in the 70s, I think. And he had his own print shop. And he asked me, hey, you can draw. Can you draw somebody with boobs? And I, sure, I don't know what they look like because I was 14. And yeah, and he paid me for it. So, hey, that's great. And I could buy some books on animation or whatever I liked. And then at one point, Daan Jippes, who I had been visiting a lot of comic artists, Dutch comic artists, because I wanted to find out the tricks. So every single comic book artist that was alive at the time, I think I visited at one point. Well, I'm at 14 or 14 years old, 15 years old. And then at one point, Daan Jippes told me, hey, Donald Duck is looking for artists, and you should try out. I said, yeah, sure. So I drew up a couple of covers. Different characters, about 8 of them or something, and then I went over there, and they bought 5 of them. So we're like, "Whoa, that's great!" And then at one point they asked me, "Would you want to draw a comic?" And they gave me a script, and I didn't really think it was that funny, so I changed it. I rewrote it, and then I handed it in. All drawn, and they said, well, that was not the intention. The idea was that you would just draw it up, not that you would rewrite it. I said, oh, I didn't know that. But they said, you know what, actually it's funnier than what it was, so yeah, we'll buy it. And then what happened is then other people who worked there asked me, oh, can you come up with a joke, and can you come up with an idea? And actually I didn't really draw. I drew a few Little Bad Wolf and Hiawatha stories and so on, but I did more writing. So yeah, that was sort of my start into comics, because in the same house where Donald Duck magazine was, there was the Geïllustreerde Pers at the time, later VNU. And yeah, all the Dutch magazines and all the Dutch comic magazines were in that same building, so it was easy to walk from one office to the next and then show your stuff. And that's how I got involved with EPO, or the Pep magazine first. And then that turned into Apple, and so on and so on, and it just took off from there.
And you also got involved by like a famous Dutch title called Sjors en Jimmy. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? How you got involved in that as well?
Well, I think the assignment to draw Sjors en Jimmy was given to somebody I knew already, because we both worked for Donald Duck magazine. It was Robert van der Kolft. And and it was written by Patty Klein, and my co-writer Jan van Die and me, we were avid film fans, so we would go watch 1 or 2 movies at night, and usually Robert you could see his light on because he was working late, and we would drop by, and then he would show what he was working on. And while we were there, we thought, yeah, that's not really that funny story of my life, really. That just doesn't really work. Isn't it funnier if blah, blah, blah? And then at a certain point, Robert said, well, why don't you come up with a few? And so Jan and I did. We actually wrote, I don't know, 20 of them or something during a weekend. And we then gave them to the publishing house. And they said, yeah, these are funnier. But yeah, I had a writer on the contract already. So it was kind of awkward, and because then she rewrote them, and it was nobody was happy. So, but eventually, yeah, the thing was tanking in the polls, as I say. So they were willing to take a risk, and then they gave us the assignment, and then we did like, I don't know, 20, 30 albums, or 50. I think I've lost count how many we did. Yeah. But same, we called, some journalists called us the Virojas. We, Wilbert, Robert, and Jan. And that sounded like an accordion trio, so we liked the name. We stuck with it, and that's where we did. Eventually, it was such a big hit, Sjors en Jimmy, that they named the magazine after it. They called the magazine after it. And then then at a certain point we got a call from Flair magazine, Belgian women's magazine, and because the son of the main editor, Bill van Elben, I think. He was a fan of Sjors en Jimmy, and he showed it to his dad. And then his dad said, hey, why don't you come over and make a comic for my magazine? And we did that, and there's now I don't know, 20 books of that as well. And it all has ended, of course. These things, comics is kind of like that type of comics. It's, that has run its course. But that was a 25, 30-year comic book career.
Yeah. Hey, and looking back at that period and thinking about like telling stories by comics, which is a total different thing than motion image in that sense. It's a total different way of how you how to say, experience the story. We had a few months ago. We had Amélie Young, and she told us like reading a graphic novel is a really different experience than watching a film because of the timing, like using text balloons. It is also you have an overview about what's going to happen when you open up the comic or the magazine. So, what did you learn from comics? As what's your most important lesson regarding storytelling by comics?
Well, first of all, to be entertaining. I think, but that is true for anything. In this, if you bore people, okay, you can forget it. So you have to be entertaining. That's number one. I think clarity also. You don't understand what's being told, and forget it. But also, I think to be brief and concise with your ideas. And I think in comics, the old way of storyboarding, the way it was done in the from the 30s to, let's say, until Cintiq came along in 2000, is much more like comics, because they didn't really, if somebody was talking, they had maybe Bill Peet would draw like two drawings for one or two lines. That's it. And then after the Cintiq came in, the producer wanted more and more drawings, and it became just, basically you keyframe the sequence. What is nice with that is that basically you're creating moments in time, which is not what you do with comics, But in film you create moments in time, and so doing more drawings give you that. But they're entirely different ways of storytelling. There's a lot that you can tell in comics that is between the lines, between the two pictures, the white between the pictures. That's where a lot of the story can take place. And in film, of course, you have to go more into detail.
Yeah, but in that sense, in you're deconstructing scenes, right? So you decide what is important to tell to get the overall story or gag, etc. Is that something that you took with you to your career in film? Like really thinking about like, okay, if this doesn't work in like a few images, it will definitely not work in 1,000 images.
Yeah, it definitely helped that I had that background. But no, film is so different. There's so many. First of all, there's a film grammar. That doesn't apply to comics. As I may rightly put out, you're looking at a whole page in one go. And if, let's say, the surprise is at the bottom of the page, you've already seen it before you've started reading it. Mm-hmm. So you hide that, to the next page. But in film, you don't see the next image. It's just that one thing that is in front of you. So what I said, it's moments in time that you get to create. But you have to learn film grammar. Really, it's important where you put the camera and where you cut and where what is the point of view. You don't really do point of views. It's something that is very unique to film. I don't think there's any other medium except maybe literature that has point of view. But comics, you don't really do that.
Was that something you really had to learn when going from doing comics into commercials? Was that something you really had to find out yourself? Like, okay, the difference in how to use camera and what you just said, the film grammar. Was that something you really had to learn yourself in a different way than you was used to do it?
Yeah, I remember. Well, some of it came natural. I know you watch movies, yeah. So you absorb these things already, and some of it came very natural. But there are specific things, like the 180-degree rule, which doesn't really apply to comics, but definitely to film. so yeah, there was a lot of things that you learn along the way, and I'm still learning. It never stops. Every time there's some new story guru who writes a new book about how to construct a story, you always like, oh yeah, there's a new look. But here's something I didn't know. Even with reviews, movie reviews, when you read them, you say, oh, hey, this reviewer saw something that I didn't notice when I watched the film. So, you keep learning, and I'm learning also, because that's another thing, I think, but that's more for maybe for later. Things keep changing, constantly, and that's just necessary.
You have to keep developing to tell stories in the best possible way. Hey,
it doesn't always develop in the best possible way. Sometimes it goes south for a while, and then it will recover. But there's fashions. There's fashionable. Well, now with all the superhero stuff, for instance, that kind of stuff. But that is, again, it's always moving, always changing. So that's really if anything I've learned especially since I arrived here in Hollywood, then that's really the thing that I probably valued most, that I discovered that you have to, even when I think, and I'm running ahead now, but when I think of the people who, when I got here first, all these people that were animator, pencil animator, character animator, and a lot of young people who, it takes 10 years, 15 years before you can draw well enough and animate well enough to, it takes a lot of work. And suddenly in 1 year, that was all wiped away because the entire industry decided to go CG, that kind of thing.
We're definitely going to discuss that a bit later, for sure, because that's interesting and important topic. You also did some illustrations. I saw this one is also kind of in mixed media approach, and I also saw this style for a book everybody should read. It's producing animation, and if you buy it, it's by the wonderful Zaha Dawlato. I can't pronounce it, but she's your friend, right?
Dawlato, she's a very good friend near here, and she asked me to do the cover for that, which is like the only book about producing animation that's on the market. So it's like
and it's a really good one as well.
Yeah.
Hey,
it's updated. It's constantly being updated. So this is the third printing, the one at the top.
Yeah, because things are constantly changing also in animation production, right? It's a totally different software, total different approach. Hey, but do you also did a lot of illustration, or is that something that you did on the side, Wilbert?
No, that was, at one point I decided I wanted to just do more illustration and experiment, because I never went to art school. So, I did for like about a year, but it was all arty-fight, people who would take a piece of polyester and punch a hole in it and then said, this represents the universe in all its different sides with blah, blah, blah. And I would do draw something, and they say, yeah, that's a Disney still life. So I didn't really fit in. But then when I was, everything with comics and went well, Shirishimi, was a success and so on. I wanted to do experiment a little bit more with paint and with all kinds of different techniques. And luckily, advertising at that point was very experimental at the time. There was there was really the second golden age of illustration. It was not as realistic as the first wave in the 40s and 50s, but it was more experimental, and that fit great. And then Comic House, Hans Baring, he had he started representing me, and then I did a lot of different techniques and different styles. And at one point, because he knew I was interested in animation, he got an assignment for, I forgot what the first one was, but some commercial, and he said, hey, can you help me out with that? Because I had a little bit of experience. Peter de Wit from Sigmund, and I had started a studio, and then some producer came over and said, hey, I have this pilot I want to make for Veronica TV, and could you do that for me? It was animation, and we had never done it. I mean, so So we made every mistake in the book and worked our ass off for a couple of weeks. But then, there was like a, I don't know, 20-second thing or something, or minute thing that was mostly camera moves because we didn't know how to animate. But it was.
And here you see already working in the animation industry, and this is like what you're doing is a timing, right? So you were like doing the boards already and trying to time how long every shot should take and how it would transform into another.
There was No Showboat, which was a campaign. It was for a comic house, and Hans and I co-directed that one. And I did the backgrounds, I painted the backgrounds, and did the storyboard. And that was a song that was written, and they gave to us the song and said, make an animation film that goes with it. So we did followed the song, and we did the boards. And then you see me in that photograph, you see me in front of the boards, and I'm just listening to that song. I still wake up in the middle of the night and I hear that song because I listened to it like 10,000 times, I think. And then you just time out, just try to, with a stopwatch, try to see if you can make it work. And the animators were always complaining because like, I can't do all that in so little time.
Hey,
Eventually they did.
But with Comic House and with you and some other like Piet Kroon and Samsi Haya and Hans Richter, they were working for Comic House, and they were quite revolutionary in the sense to the Dutch animation industry was quite small, but they really want to have this high quality kind of animation approach, as we know from Hollywood. So like real nice cell, really well painted background, so really, how do you say, polished and high quality stuff. And you were involved in this. When did you decide to then that you say, okay, the Dutch animation industry is not like, how do you say, giving me what I'm looking for, and I have to find it somewhere else?
That wasn't at all the case. Well, first of all, I have to say with the Comic House, the Dutch animation industry didn't exist, but the Dutch animation at that time was mostly art oriented. People that would do everything. They would write and animate and shoot and do the music and do the catering. And usually they were the only person in the audience that would watch it, maybe their mother, So it was not really my cup of tea. Some of it was very pretentious, which I absolutely hate. So Hans was actually doing commercial animation, which I was much more interested in, because I've always been interested in, even when I did comics, in big audiences. The first thing, Donald Duck magazine, my first employer, not really employer, but publisher, that had at the time, I think, almost 1 million subscribers. So and I always liked that, to work for a big audience. So I fit right in with Hans, and he did commercials and tried to reach as many people as possible. But then the way it transferred to the scene here, the industry in the US, that was because Daan Jippers, again, who has always been at every hinge of my career, Daan Jippers has been there. And he sent me a fax. That's how long ago it is. Faxes. For people who don't know, faxes is basically a printer that you send something printed over the phone. They don't exist anymore. But he sent me a fax, and he said, Warner Brothers is sending headhunters over the world, and they'll be at the film festival in Utrecht, and you should go and talk to them. And that was because in '95, Disney brought out Lion King, and Lion King made, I don't know how many $100 million in a few weeks, but a shitload. And then on the basis of that, every studio in Hollywood decided they would want to get into the animation business, because it's you own the stars. You own the actors, because Tom Cruise makes a film, and the next film he's at another company and another film. But you can put them on bread boxes and balloons and everything. They started these studios. DreamWorks started, and a bunch of other. But what happened is the Hollywood talent pool was depleted really fast, because Disney at that time, based on their own success, said, instead of one film every 3 years or every 5 years, we're going to do one every year. And so they needed people. And yeah, there was Hollywood. There was nobody here anymore. Disney hired them all. So then they said, "Well, let's look all over the world." And then different studios sent different headhunters. So I went there at one point. Well, no, I don't want to go into details. It takes too long of a story. But basically, one of the headhunters was Dave Master. And Dave Master had run animation school or classes here in LA, and there's a lot of animators that through him came into the industry. And we spent like 15 minutes together, and he immediately said, "You fit right in. You have the right energy," and so on. And before I even showed him a drawing, he hadn't seen anything. And then the next thing was, I made him laugh, a couple of times. Maybe that's it. But then the next thing was, they asked me to send a portfolio, and I didn't even have a portfolio. I had one for advertising, and I had one for comics, but I didn't have one for animation. And there's this list of what do they want you to have in the portfolio is like live drawing, and I didn't have any. So I would just with a couple of Dutch animators like Arjan Wilschut and Samsia Hadja, we would you go to Van Beek, and they have these ads up there from people that do modeling, and you pay $10 or something, and then they come over, how much it was at the time. And yeah, we would do that like twice a week, and just draw. So that's how I filled my portfolio, and I would just do stuff, like to fill it up. I sent it over, and then they said, "Great, come on over. Here's a ticket." And then I arrived, and here's a car, and here's an apartment, and here's a big paycheck, and we want you here for 3 months. And there was nothing to do because I think there were 26 people at the time because they were still gathering that studio. So, and because there was nothing to do, they tried to sort of create a team. They sent all of us to every story guru and design guru that there is in Hollywood. I really like the Bruce Block classes about visual storytelling, and Robert McKee. I think I did Robert McKee probably like 8 times over a period of 10 years or something. Every class that he ever gave, lectures from famous directors or artists, Gay and Wilson. I know, cartoonists, you name it. Suddenly. I remember one of the first days weeks we were there. Pete Kroon and I, we went we went to a party, and there was Mark Davis was there. And, oh my God, it's Mark Davis! It's the guy who animated the Queen in Snow White, and that happened constantly at that time. Like Chuck Jones was like he was in the cubicle where I was working, and he was right behind me, so I had a conversation with him, and and Joe Grant, all these people that were heroes of mine. Suddenly, I meet them person to person, and it was 5 years later, all of them were dead because they were already in the 80s at that time. So it's like, God, that's just amazing that just to be there at that moment, just the last little vestige of 2D animation, and to see that, and then everything changes, and you just try to stick with it.
You worked in that time on later on the Quest of Camelot, and also on Osmosis Jones, or both 2D projects.
Yeah,
and what you just told about change, and just in that little first steps of your career, already big changes were there. Like Lion King was a huge success, so everybody wanted to have their part of the cake. So they were starting off all those studios. Then there were a few. There were more studios, and then actually 3D came in quite close afterwards, right? So already the whole industry changed quite rapidly, and you got involved in one of the first CGI kind of projects, and can you tell us a little bit? It's a nice example of about how your career is evolved. How you got involved with Jimmy Neutron.
Yeah, and I've been so lucky, and I had such lucky timing every time, So really, it's not any reflection on my talents. It's a lot of it is luck. This was like so. Warner Brothers, I worked on with Peter on Osmosis Jones, which was the third film they did there. I missed out on Iron Giant because I was doing development on films that were never made. But then, so Osmosis Jones, I was the last story guy on Osmosis Jones because I also worked on the live action. And then my contract's up, and I knew that Warner Bros. Was going to close down their animation studio after Osmosis Jones. Contract was up. I had like 7 months on my visa, and I was like, okay, now what? Well, that was it. It's like, okay, it was a fun adventure for like 5 years or something. It was a fun adventure. I'll go back to Holland, maybe we should travel a little bit and see what happens. And then I got a phone call for somebody, Moroni Taylor, who I worked with, story guy I worked with at the Warner Brothers, and he said, "Hey, are you looking for a job?" I said, "Well, not really. Yeah, sure. If there's something that you," I said, "Yeah, there's a studio in Texas, Dallas, Texas, and they are doing one of those computer films." He said, like Toy Story, because I was the only one. Like Toy Story. And he's like, "Oh, yeah. How do they do this?" I don't know. I said, "But they're looking for story people." I said, "Oh, okay." So I sent in some work and so on. And they said, "Yeah, please come on over." So I went over there. And and also I had never been outside LA really. So, but while I was there, the entire industry shifted, and they decided that CG was going to be the thing. And then what happens is the people that hire people, they were all getting panicked. It's like, "Oh my God, where are we going to find people who know CG? Because we don't know shit. We have never worked on it." And well, let's look at Pixar. But everybody at Pixar was locked. People were not leaving there, surely. So they looked, and there was only one other studio that was doing it, a tiny little garage shop, really, in Dallas, Texas. And so suddenly our team, was like, we were hot. But these guys, and this is the funny thing, it doesn't matter. We're a story guy. We do story. So it doesn't matter if you execute the film in sock puppets or you animate poop. It doesn't matter how you execute it. We're doing story. But these people hide it. What William Goldman says, in Hollywood nobody knows anything, and it's very true. It was very true at that moment. But it was great. And then Zara Dawlatabadi, who wrote that book, she invited me for a breakfast at one point and introduced me to the co-writer of the book, Catherine Winder, who was then at Fox, and she was overseeing Blue Sky Studio, who were just starting with something. They had done short stuff and commercials, but it was the first feature. And she said, "Hey, they need a couple of gags. Do you mind going there to New York and for a couple of weeks and think of some gags?" And I had never been in New York, so I said, "Yeah, sure." And then I looked at the reels that they had, and I pointed out a couple of story problems. I was like, how does, anyway, just the way I normally do it. And then they kept me for 8 months. So I was there for something like 8 months, a bit back and forth. But and then there was one of the first contributions I had was somebody had made Mark Baldo was an animator. He had come up with the Scrat, and he had done this little thing that was on the internet, the Scrat. It was really funny, and people reacted to that. But it was way before the movie was done, right? And they realized, we have to put that Scrat in there somehow. And how do we do that? And I then suggested the idea. It's like, well, the beginning is the migration. So what if one of those animals steps on the Scrat, in the migration, and then when he lifts his foot, the Scrat is underneath that foot, and then he goes, "Ow! Ooh! Ee!" And he's being carried into the film, basically, and then he shows up later. You can do it that way. And they use that. That's actually in the film. And then the next thing that we did was the dodo. What was it again? Oh yeah, I thought it was one of the notes I had. I said, "This is supposed to be a comedy, isn't it?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." So well, you realize that everything you have is a tragic event. The village that's being raided by tigers. There's a baby almost drowns. Mother dies. She's dead. There's then they go back to the camp and it's all destroyed. And then the baby is starving. And it's whereas you only have Scrat. Where are the jokes? This is miserable, all of it. It's like so sad. And so, well, how would you fix it? Because you cannot just complain. You have to come up with an idea. And then I said, well, give me some time. And then Moroni and I, we sat in a room for a weekend, and we came up with several approaches. It was a master class, and and had all kinds of other different things. And then they chose this one, the dodos.
Yeah,
because,
I have the scene. Let's watch it together.
well, it's just a snippet, I guess. Yeah. I don't even think this is in the movie. I don't even know.
Well, there is this dodo scenes in the movie, of course.
Yeah, and it is still a ball game. That was the whole idea. It was all about the melon as a ball game. Yeah, but the idea was, we're looking at all these animals that are extinct, and the only animal that actually made it the longest was the dodo that got extinct in the 1700s. But all the other ones, you're filling the tank of your car with now. So well, let's use the dodos, and then we started working with that. And I think Moroni came up with that last line of like, "There goes our last female." I think he came up with that. And then it's like, okay, so we did in one weekend, really rough. And these are really rough sketches, tiny little sketches like that, and they were even rougher than this. And we presented it, and the thing was like 4 times longer because there was a whole subplot with the tiger trying to get to the baby and so on. But then, the producer and the director really liked it, and it went into production. So that was fun. We spent way more time on it after it was greenlit.
Because in that sense, what you just mentioned is quite a dark story, and you want to give it more, I say, light and comedy and more fun and more entertainment, as I understood correctly.
That was the note, yeah.
Yeah, and then how does it work as a no-no, right? So you think, okay, we have this story, and you just think about good ideas about how to approach prehistoric figures and what could happen and what happened, like what you said with mammoths who have big feet, so things will stick underneath it, eggs and dodos. So you have the power to bring that into the story, and you offer that gag, and then the director likes it, and in a way they try to embed that in the overall story. Am I correct?
Yeah, overall that's correct. But in this case, of course, if you look at the dodo sequence, it is a monolithic piece. It basically came from, I think the answer I had when they said, well, what would you do about it? I think the answer I gave at the time was like, well, we do what they do in the circus. As soon as an acrobat, of a trapeze artist falls to his death, send in the clowns, and that's when we looked at models that they hadn't used. The dodos originally were in that migration scene, but they took them out. They didn't use them. They said, "Oh, that's a pity. Let's use those. They are like clowns." And we just started working with that. But you can take that whole dodo sequence and you could just lift it out of the movie, and it still connects. It's just basically comedy,
So it's little short movies into that okay, nice. Hey,
just to lighten the palate, just to freshen up to go like, hey, don't forget, folks, this movie is funny. You're supposed to laugh. Now later, when we did more with Scrat, that added a lot, of course. But at that time in production, that the dodo didn't exist, and it was a pretty, low or somber movie.
Hey, I'm going to ask a few difficult questions, but maybe you say, okay, Leon, I'm not bullshit. Can possible, but this is already a really strong image, right? This is the last dodo. His friends are already over the cliff, and he's the last one, doing this, and then dodo extinct. But telling a good joke, right? So bringing a good gag, having a good sense of humor, bringing quite of originality into it, it's quite difficult. I can imagine that it's really difficult to bring a kind of original approach that is actually entertaining and funny at the same time. So what's it's not a secret, but what's a good gag? What should a good gag do, and how do you check if the gag is not already done by Chuck Jones of Looney Tunes or whatever? So how does that work to bring in an original gag in a movie? Because I can imagine it's really difficult to.
Well, the answer to what makes a good gag is really simple. If it makes you laugh, it's a good gag. That's it. But as to create the gag, that is so you know, some of them they just come like in a flash, in 1 millionth of a second. You go, oh, I got something, you know, and then you explain it. and hopefully it works. If you see people laugh, that's it. Others, you know, you really have to work on, and it takes a while because you have to hone them, and you have to model, and you have to take a little bit of, oh, well, maybe this should be, and that takes longer. There's also, I've had moments where I was supposed to deliver a gag the next day, and nothing would come. I couldn't think of anything. I'm not lying. I have often at times I've been sitting on my computer on a piece of paper with really crying in panic, really literally tears. Oh my! I can't do it anymore. I've lost it. There's nothing. So it's everything in between. You know, it's like, hey, here it just pops in my head, and it's fully birthed, and it's agony for, you know. Really, and sometimes they never work. There's gags that you know that, oh, this is funny, and somehow, yeah, that it never comes together. There's no trick. If there was a trick, please.
I can totally imagine. I can totally imagine that it's really there's no trick, and there's the same as that there's no key to success, or there's no secret to success. And what you said, like a bunch of luck helps a lot. Building a career, it's true. But I was like, really, because it's so important in animation, feature and series to have that combination of drama and humor to make it entertainment and to make it like suitable for the whole family. It also has a kind of certain sharpness in the humor so that it's interesting for adults and for kids as well. So I can imagine there are like ingredients or criteria or things you have to keep in mind by developing these kind of scenes, because I see a lot of films, and when you go to like festivals and you go to student programs, you also see that not every joke is working. So I can imagine, like what you're saying is, with example of Ice Age, you take a few ingredients and you're just going to try out when it's like kind of, it's rough enough that it has an edge, but it also is funny to work it out. So I can imagine you're also a collector of elements and try to tell a joke with it. Is that true, or am I totally wrong? Like the axe and a dodo, like the feet, or ice, like ice and scratch. So what can I do with a block of ice? And so having like simple elements, and how can I make it funny? Because otherwise, telling a joke and you can pick out everything of the world. It's the same with the artist. It's really difficult to tell a good job if you have all the ingredients there are. I think the humor is in the limitations a bit. Am I wrong?
No, that's exactly the way I am. If somebody, and I've had several times in my life that people offer you carte blanche. Yeah. Well, I hang myself. It's so hard to have carte blanche, because what am I going to do? Maybe I should do an interpretive dance and create a ballet, or a glass stained window. How about that? Or how about some wood sculpting, or, you know, or write a poem? You can do anything. I hate carte blanche because I will never do anything. It's just a decision what I'm going to do or what it is. The technique even will hold me back. But there's limitations, and they could be of any kind. It could be just a location, or it could be like we have 3 seconds, or it is like we have a certain amount of money to do it, so you have to think otherwise, you know. Or it's going to be drawn in a certain style that has limitations. Limitations really, for me at last, but I've heard of from a lot of creative people, they really help to set the boundaries, but that's not the word I was looking for. But basically the canvas for what that you're going to fill, you know. And so yeah, I think they're very important.
Yeah. And do you check it? Do you check it with because I can imagine that timing is really important. How you set the joke, it's the same that you have to give something, but not everything, and then the joke comes in. Do you test if it works? Is there like a partner you work a lot with to check if the jokes work? Because if you want to work for a big audience, you also want to know if it is appealing for a big audience as well, because people have so many unique characters and backgrounds and sense of humor that it's also like difficult to be funny for everybody, for big audiences.
Yeah, well, first of all, timing you mentioned. I have no control over that. I'm not directing the movie. I'm only offering suggestions of possible, gags, but story moments, or even logic moments, or sometimes sequences. But they're all always, suggestions. So whatever comes out of it, whatever decision is being made, is out of my hands. Other people do that. And what was the other one? I forgot.
No, do you use a partner to check out if the jokes work? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Well, as far as comics, I've always worked with Jan van Die. So we and we always disagree. And I have a current writing partner, Dave Lux, and we almost disagree on everything, and that's great because it's sort of that irritation is works for us. It's like like I would say it's because of the irritation that an oyster makes a pearl. Without that it wouldn't do that. It wouldn't even begin. So it is. But when I didn't have a partner to work with them, but when you're on the studio, you're surrounded by creative people, and every time I had something that I thought could work, I would go to a colleague, hey, do you have a moment? And then I would pitch the idea. And then if the reaction is they laugh, or even better, they jump on board. That is always the best reaction. Where they go, oh yeah, and you could do that, yeah, and you could do that. They start improving on it. Oh yeah. When the reaction is like, yeah, that's funny. It's like, no, that's not funny. If it was funny, you would laugh. If people say, yeah, that's funny. No, forget it. Just go back and try again. It's good to have a reaction because you are ultimately working for an audience. That's why you have to try out everything. One of the things I noticed with I wouldn't say amateur, but inexperienced people. That's basically, amateur sounds so degrading, but people who are less experienced with this.
People who are still in development.
Yeah, I call it the euphoria problem. Every creative recognizes this. The moment you get an idea, which is basically a solution to a problem that either you were handed or that you created for yourself. It's a solution to something, and then you go like, oh, fantastic! This is the best idea I ever had. I love this idea. I mean, so happy, The difference between an amateur and a professional is that the amateur doesn't want to leave that bubble. They think the bubble is that they want to stay within that feeling that the euphoria gives them, and they think that if you attack the idea or address the idea or criticize the idea, then you puncture that bubble of euphoria, and they don't want that, so they never question it. Just let's not touch it. That idea is brilliant because I don't want to spoil it for myself. Now the professional, they have that, and we all have that euphoria of that idea. What you do is you go, that was wonderful. What a great idea. That was good for you too. Yeah, wonderful. And then you take the idea and then you hit it with a hammer, you set fire to it, and you saw it in two, and you throw it in the air and against the wall, and you stamp on it, and you do everything. You question it, you track it throughout the rest of the scene or the movie. Does it still work over there? And you do everything possible that could damage the ideas just to find out if it is a strong idea. And if it survives that, it's a brilliant idea. Usually you find holes and you find things that don't work, but then that gives you the opportunity to fix them and to find a better solution. Or maybe you shouldn't wear a green tie, maybe it should be a yellow tie, whatever, just details. And I think that's the main difference I find between students or amateurs or people who have little experience, that they are afraid that this is going to be the only idea they will ever have. So they're protecting it. And it's like, no, you'll have a million of other ideas.
And sometimes, and that's, you are not like avoiding feedback, or you're not avoiding that it's not the best thing. And that's sometimes that happens with people that are still like exploring these kind of things, is that they are afraid that feedback will make them insecure, and that they will have this imposter syndrome, or that they have like this artist block, or that things happens that they don't like evolve anymore. But that's totally not the case, right? If you want to train, you have to go through some difficult moments to actually learn something from
And
what you're trying to achieve.
it's also a weird ego. I had once with a student, it was in Holland actually, academy, and it was somebody was telling a story that they wanted to make, and yeah, it was like, okay. And then I went to the bathroom and I came back and I sort of like had the solution of how it would work, and I pitched his story back to him. And it was, it was obvious, like the moment I got to the hint in the story where, everybody in that room went like, oh, because they all felt it, they all recognized it, and the guy as well. And he said, yeah, oh my God, yeah, that's the story I want to tell. Yeah, but now I can't do it. I said, well, what do you mean? So yeah, no, I can't tell this, now I can't make it anymore. So well, why not? He said, yeah, because you came up with the idea. I said, so what? You can have it. It's not mine. I did it. It was just a solution to a problem you had. Here it is. You can have it. You don't have to use my name or anything. No, he couldn't do it. It was all, So well, what if we are in a cafe and there's a drunken guy next to you and he would come up with that? Would you then use it? Because there's a guy you never see again. It's like, and then I questioned him a little bit further, and it really came down to the fact that had I mentioned the idea in private, he probably would have used it. But the fact that I did it in a room with his classmates, with his peers there, they all knew it came from me. So then he couldn't accept it anymore. And it's like, wow, that is so weird, because then it's just ego. It's like, it should be about the best idea and, the best result you have.
Bringing that to How to Train a Dragon, but keep on the same subject, that's also, I think you have to learn, right? So that you offer ideas and it's up to them if they use it, yes or no. So in that sense, maybe that's also part of being professional. Maybe it's also because you're part of that bigger industry in Hollywood. Don't take it too personal, because otherwise it will destroy you, right? And I think in a bigger picture, that's what you're telling with the example that you just gave. It's like you're offering it, use it, but don't make it a big thing out of it. Just make the film work. So it was like trying to solve a solution, and only see it like that, and not like an artistic heartbreak.
Right. Well, I think, this is a story I've told many times, because I used it in schools, and it was how I had to deal with rejection. Once you got into the industry, what happens constantly, I have to put my heart and soul and blood and tears in the thing I make. I have to own it. It's completely, at that moment when I get that assignment, the movie is mine, and I make it the way I think is best. And I will add ideas and, change things if I feel at that moment. And if I can, sometimes, when I started, you just follow the script and no questions asked. But especially later, I want to make it better. When it leaves, I'm a plusser with a U. That's one of the first things I read in old Disney books, on the plussing. That was a Disney term. I thought, oh, I like that. When it leaves your desk, it's better. But then I realized very early on in my first couple of months at Warner Brothers that what happens is, here you have the gush and flush, which means if you pitch something, everybody goes, yeah, that's great, fantastic, wonderful, wonderful. And then the next thing is flush, it's just gone. You never hear from it. It's gone. And or they like it, but they change it so much, and I realized, like, oh, or they just say no, that rejection is really hard. And I realized in the first couple of months here that I would not be able to survive it, if it hurt me so much every time. And I realized I have to find a way to cope with that. And I thought about it a long time, and then I found a metaphor which I can, it really was helpful for me, and it is. I consider myself to be a surrogate mother. I'm being hired by people who don't know how to make a baby, and they ask me to make a baby for them. So I do that. I eat healthy. I make it, exercise. I make sure it's the healthiest baby, the best looking, healthiest baby I could ever make. And then at one point, I've given birth to the baby, and I go over, and it's the pitch. I pitch it. Here is my baby. Look how beautiful he is. And they take the baby from me. And then the next thing that always happens, oh, thank you so much. It was a beautiful baby. Applause, applause. Then the next thing that happens is they say, oh, yeah, we know that at the time when we when we asked you to deliver that baby for us, yeah, we wanted a boy, but in the meantime we've changed our minds. Now we want a girl, but no problem because so it's a girl now. And they say, oh, and we only have budget for one eye. It's like a poke. Okay, that's fine now. And you know what? Instead of an arm, I think the movie now is sponsored by a fish store, and we wanted to have it a crab arm. So here's the arm go. Now, if you're still emotionally attached to that baby, you'll die. So
this is quite a horrible example as well, right?
So I have, I realize what I have to do in order to survive that emotional distress that comes with it is that the moment you pitch it, I cut the umbilical cord. Okay, snap. It's your baby now. I am not attached in any way. I fulfilled my job requirement and everything, and I am not emotionally attached to my baby. It's yours. You can fuck it up any way you want. And yeah, that's. I think that's something you have to. Have to learn, or you have to practice, or you just have to do it. Otherwise, you will always be tormented. And it's something that I already had in advertising. I learned a little bit, but it was 100 times more important in when I came here. That's how
I'm bringing it back to How to Train a Dragon, like developing ideas, try to make the best film. That sometimes happens with very less information, right? So you're normally hired to solve a problem as a kind of a story doctor, or they have nothing and they want to have something. So they have just like a few lines or like a script or something quite minimal, and you have to, how do you say, give ideas or a good approach to how they could look at the movie. So you also were involved with How to Train a Dragon. Is that like the same that you just told about, like with Ice Age, you have this kind of prehistoric animals in an ice age, and here you have a dragon living together with people? Is that then the two ingredients, and you're just going to start developing ideas?
Well, first of all, Story Doctor wasn't at play when I did that. That was much later.
No. But there is like different. I just wanted to say or explain that there are like different stages of when you get involved in a story to solve a problem, or really at first when they are starting developing ideas and you want to offer them.
Development or exploration, and that happened.
Yeah, because that's the term, right? Exploration, story exploration.
Yeah, and that's something ideally, when you're working at Disney or at DreamWorks or Sony. Now Sony is different than that way, but you work at a studio that keeps you on between movies. They just throw something at you, a book or something, and say, okay, see what you can do with this. And in this case, this was DreamWorks had bought the books, How to Train Your Dragon, and yeah, it was very early. There was no script. There was nothing really yet. And so I read the book, and there's very little story. If you see the movie, there's way more story in the movie than there is in the book. And it was basically this bunch of kids, or one kid with dragon as pets. So my approach was, okay, this entire village economy is activated, what you call it, by dragons. Dragons are really a part of their community. And so it's like instead of a boy and his dog, I just thought of a boy and his dragon. How would they, how would that work? And that was it. And I just spent 2 weeks on just that, exploring that. And I had some ideas about how the city or how the village would be heated, by dragon fire, and how every craftsman in that village would use a dragon to, the baker to bake the breads, and the farmer to use its tail as a plow, and that kind of stuff. So it was just very surfacey stuff, It's not really story or story structure. It's just like, hey, what are the possibilities that you have with this subject matter? And that's what exploration is. That could be as easy like okay, somebody has to go over a bridge, or somebody.
Oh, that's a good bridge, because I've got it here.
Well, that one you have right now. Oh yeah. Well, that's not really. Is that it? No, that's a different.
Oh no,
sequence.
that's the other one. Sorry.
No, exploration. This is earthquake. You know, oh, okay, so there's an earthquake. See what you can do with an earthquake, basically. And that's it. That you just go like, oh, you can this. Or how about this joke? You know, it's a cup in a cradle, a cat in a cradle. Or how about all the roads get braided, and then then this could happen, and then maybe you can go into continuity, and then something he finds out that the city is what's happening. And then here, look, the next panel, it says runs to the telescope, and then he swivels it over to the city. And Jojo sees a bunch of spot gags. So here are the spot gags, earthquake and a couple of painters. Everybody's asleep at that moment, I think, in the story. So here's a couple of guys that are doing some advertising on billboards, and they glue themselves to the board. And here's a high-rise apartment building, and it breaks up in segments and flies away with the awnings. And then over there's a garage, and it shakes, and it's like a jackpot. All the cars stream out. You just do a bunch of gags. And then this is a little bit more story to put in there, but
all these drawings are also yours, right? So
yeah, these are really fast.
Yeah, because it also already comes so much alive. So it's a kind of a combination of like being good writing jokes and thinking about jokes, designing it, but also cinematography wise and storyboard wise. And this almost looks like keyframes. So you're already developing quite a lot in these kind of explorations, right?
Well, you try to, bring the idea across as best as you can. And again, these are really rough drawings, they're not refined at all. But as long as it communicates, that's all it needs to be. And that's just one of the things, most people think of storyboarding is all about the drawing. It isn't. Drawing is just like, this is the last part of it as far as I'm concerned. It is like knowing the alphabet and knowing some grammar. Knowing the grammar, doesn't make you a writer. It doesn't, it's about the content of it, it's about the ideas. And we are tasked with translating sometimes a page of a script, which is then written, but it's writing, so it's not a movie, so it has to be translated into images and it has to work that way. But sometimes it's just a conceptual line. Sometimes it's a question. Like what can you do with snow, or what can you do with that kind of thing. So the ideas are first, the top of the list. That's the first thing you have to do. You have to come up with 20 variations on how to peel an orange. And,
yeah, because this was what you just mentioned, right? So what can you think about snow? If the village would be like in a cold front, what would it like? How would they react on the snow, etc.? So these are explorations about how the village could respond to it, right, or the city.
The guy who takes his morning coffee, and the coffee is frozen, and he checks his breath, and then the breath starts snowing. And the fridge is he opens the door, and it's all snow, and I don't know. It's just all kinds of stuff, and you just come up with 50 jokes or more, whatever, and just explore, and then you pitch it. And actually, none of these things were used in the film, not a single one. But that's you have to just explore, see what is possible. I don't think the scene is even made in the movie anymore. Snow, well, there's still snow, but.
And here you also worked for Despicable Me, and this is also one of the explorations, as you call it. And in the end, it's quite an important sequence in the film, like when he's trying to reach out to his arch villain. Or a colleague or a competitor. So this is all combination of your ideas, and what I also like, because I think the drawings are already so clear. It's like what you just mentioned. You can't learn grammar. You can't just grammar and letters and then you're a writer. No, but understanding a visual language and make a really clear kind of setup of a story that everybody can understand, right? So it's really readable already. I think that's also an important part with storyboarding, right?
Especially with these with these things like exploration, all you're trying to do is bring across the idea of it, the joke of it, or the moment, And I don't do fancy camera work there. That's for later. If and maybe what if we see it and it's from the point of view of the dragon's ear, or whenever you go, but that's for later. This is continuity. What you're looking at now. This is I don't think this was in the movie either. But this was continuity, and I basically just wrote the whole thing, or I came up with well, it was a breakfast sequence. Do a breakfast sequence. I think there were a couple of lines that they wanted in there, like later on. But most of it, all these moments, she doesn't like the waffles, so she shows away. The dog eats the skull. So, and the braiding gag. That's just came up with that. What would you do? Okay, he braids their hair, and he shows them with his iPad. And then he does it, and he does, oops, and he braided his arms. So, that's not how it is supposed to be. So I think I tied these wrong, and she has knots in her shoelaces. So he takes his arms and does that, and now they're both, both his arms and the shoelaces are unwound, or unknotted. What do you call that? No, I think this was a little thing in the script. And once she's testing another adventure for school, I think that was something they had. So I did that, and then.
But it's really funny that I see a lot of moving storyboards.
Yeah.
And they are like a lot of them don't work. Not always in the first time, but this already is really clear how to look at it. And I think that's really that's I don't know, because it looks simple, but it's such a craft to make things logical all the time. Is this by analyzing a lot of films? Are you analyze? Can you even watch through a movie without analyzing it?
Oh yeah, I am very easy. I will if something is wrong in a film and it really stops the flow or something, or there's an illogical thing, I will easily pick it out. And if it's like it happens 2 or 3 times in a row, I just forget it. I just turn off the movie. But I'm very easy audience. I love to enjoy a movie, and I can sit and laugh or cry at a movie, and I really go with it. But I'm also bored easily, The weird thing is that the last couple of years, I used to watch every animated, especially feature that came out, but there are so many now, I can't keep up with it. And there's actually several of Disney I haven't seen, and several of Pixar I haven't seen, and I'm not really even that interested anymore in seeing them, because they kind of became the same. It's like, oh, there's that one again. Oh, there's that story again. And sort of like I'm a little bit bored with it.
Hey, but I can totally understand it. What is like a film? And I know this is quite a lame question, but hey, I don't have any pride or ego or. Like when you say, okay, I would have loved being involved in that movie, like within the 25 years of Hollywood. Like if they would ever ask me for that movie, I would be gold if I would be part of that one. Is there one that we definitely should check out? And you say, well, this is just like such a brilliant film.
Well, I've always felt sorry because I chose at the time to after Quest for Camelot, I didn't like the experience at all. And I missed color also. So then they said, well, there's development or there's the next movie we're going to do. And I said, well, let's go into development. Nothing of those things. That was the zoo, amongst other things, but nothing of that was, a couple of others were made. And the movie that I basically could have worked on was Iron Giant. So that one I felt like, that was, because that's still one of the best animated features. And, that came out, but what I have a bucket list, of course. I would like to do. I wish they were still making shorts. I really like that, and something like a Tex Avery type short. I would love to do with that type of humor, but yeah, they're not really being made anymore. And so yeah, you have to look. I must say, some of that humor I can do like with the ultra chords,
Yeah. The Dutch ultra chords. Yeah, we see one that you helped out a little bit later. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't go as far, but it's there definitely. This is like beatboard developed. This is just a suggestion of in one of the one of the Despicable Me films, like they had a third act. They were looking for ideas for the third act. They said, well, what if one of the minions turned into Godzilla? And so that in order to defeat him, they paint a submarine yellow so it looks like a banana. And that was it was just I don't know, just like a handful of drawings. And well, not that many, it was maybe a dozen. And then you tell a little story. We could this way, could go this way, could go this way, and this could happen. And it's like, how about that? Would you like that story? And so yeah, it's fun, but that's not what we want to do. Okay, flush. And you go to your next assignment.
This was also interesting. And then we go to the ultra shorts that you did recently and discussed it a bit further. This was just like the only sentence that you got, right? Almost.
Yeah, waiting on Katie. That was it. That was like, okay, she goes to her work and he loves her and go. And so, yeah, I had to just
and then you made this out of it, right? So almost from scratch.
Well, there was nothing. No, that one line. It's okay. So, of course, the designs were there. I used some of the designs.
And you never saw the end result, huh?
No, I don't know if this ended up in the film.
Yeah, this is a Secret Life of Pets.
Yeah, I did a lot but yeah, I never. There's a lot of the stuff I do, and it doesn't end up in the movie. And yeah, you get used to that too. A lot of the stuff is also it might inspire somebody else at best, but a lot of it, it's like, well, the movie's too long, and we need to, because nothing is much happening here. It's all it says is like he's really he loves her so much that he can't say goodbye to her. So he's trying to find different locations to see her go. There he goes again. There she goes in the distance, and and then she turns around the corner. She's gone. So now I have to change his position again, just to keep her. And trying to throw in a couple of gags. Of course, here the scale is all wrong. He's way too big. To see it. And it goes around the corner, and there's a whole bunch of pigeons sitting there. And it goes, "Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me." As he runs through. Excuse me. Whoop. Hey, careful! What are you walking? I'm walking here. And okay, he goes into this is kind of. I like this gag. It's funny because it tells us something. Wait, so we go up into the air vent. Hey, good morning, Max. I think the pigeon says, "Good morning, Max," and he goes up there and he crawls out of the air vent and he's all covered in soot. It's like all black, and he jumps down and he stands in front of that ventilator, and it goes, and it blows all the soot off, and as we pan with it, careful, and it lands onto the wall. Yeah, it lands onto the wall. So this tells us this happens every morning. I like that. And then he looks at her again and finds the highest spot he can find on the water tower, and then she disappears in the subway, I think, and then it's like, he's all left alone. So it's really a short little thing that there's not a whole lot of story in there. It just tells us like, oh my God, now it's the beginning of his day.
It's a sad start of the day, but it also shows a lot about love.
Yeah, exactly. It shows us something about his character, and there's a couple of gags in there. These are the kind of things.
But it's interesting that you're saying I like this a lot, and then you start pitching it. It's really nice to hear you pitch your story, because then it even more comes alive. But then you say, okay, but this happens daily, and that's important, right? This is like is that like the story you don't tell, but it gives this extra layer to the character. It gives this extra layer to the overall storytelling to have that kind of moments in it.
Well, I love those. Those are the moments that reveal something of the character. That is not written, or that you just you see that picture and you realize, okay, this is not the first time he did this, and there's other ways, but to give information about the character. But I like it when it's done visually. If it's not done with dialogue, because it's exposition basically, and exposition in dialogue is always kind of boring. So I love to find ways do it in a visual way.
It's nice. That's really nice. What I like on this, even though it's not a film yet, but it's a story. But that you immediately feel like that's sad, or that's. I immediately feel when you see that silhouettes or this end shot. That's Poor dog, right? We can relate to it.
It
Is
wonderful.
it that how you also check? Because I can imagine it's so difficult to. I spoke Aaron Blaise a few months ago, and
I worked on two projects that were never made at Disney.
all right,
So,
yeah, yeah. Well, he was talking about Brother Bear, and
yeah.
he also told that his brother died tragically in an accident, and he really used that experience to feel about like brother love and like family and how that actually is. So when he wanted to tell that story, he also used like how you say deep in itself, like his sadness or his respect or anything, how that feels, and he used that kind of spirit or like reflection to check out if his story works. That if he feels it in a way, it hits him, then he thinks it's good for a story because then it relates to a human scale of emotion in that sense.
Well,
Because if you
the classic is, write what you know.
yeah yeah
And what you know better than your own emotions,
yeah
it's coming from your own experiences. And that doesn't mean they have to be exactly one-on-one the same. No, you can enlarge things, you can make them smaller, you can move these emotions into other areas, but it has to start, every Oscar speech starts with the human experience, the human experience. That's what filmmaking is, and that's what it is.
yeah
That's how you relate to the characters if you recognize them. And there's nothing worse than, and when you read a script or you see a movie, and you go like, that doesn't make sense. Nobody in their right mind would do something like that.
yeah, yeah, it's not logical. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, at worst, it's not emotionally logical. There is logic you can play with. Just whatever, because yeah, there's no superheroes, and there's no magic, and there's lots of movies that have that. But
Yeah.
emotional logic still has to be true.
Yeah,
It has to be,
true.
yeah,
Yeah,
and if
it not should be artificial constructed. It should be like
right,
truthful,
yeah.
and
There's
believable.
nothing worse. There's nothing worse than these scripts or movies or stories where the writer is trying so hard. The storyteller, I should say, is trying so hard to get to a certain plot point because they need that plot point, that they force everything else, logic and emotional logic, and in order to get to that plot point. When you go, oh, wow, you just sacrificed everything just for a plot point. The plot point is way less important than the emotional value and the content, and I think that's what Aaron, was plugging into when he told you that.
Yeah. Hey,
Sure.
we go to almost the last part of our interview, and that's like what you're now doing is like helping out like Dutch filmmakers at this moment, which makes me really happy. With ultra shorts, for example. So this is a collaboration with you and Kaching cartoons that we just spoke that we're going to speak next week. Next edition, sorry, not next week, but next edition of Playgrounds in Depth. And this is their project called Inked. I'm going to show.
Oh yeah, this is the app, right. Yeah, for ink, normally the story we don't do that many drawings, but it was fun doing. This is 2 minutes, and I did 400 something panels. So I mean, every fourth or fifth frame, I think there is a different drawing, and yeah, I just needed that because it was there's no words are spoken. It's all visual. It's all acting. It's a really short clip, but yeah, the film is only 2 minutes. So.
Yeah, that's it, right? Ultra short. So it's definitely your cup of tea because everything you always work in these kind of short moments in a film that are actually ultra short. And so this is what you want to do more. Do you like it to make ultra short from beginning to an end, like the whole story told?
Well, that's definitely the fact that these things are a self-contained little story. And usually when I do this type of length, it's a smaller piece in a bigger story, So that was fun to do, but no, still a lot of work to draw these things. But what I think my contribution was not just the drawing. I think, basically these guys, and they're really fun to work with, and they had an idea, and I said, okay, let's analyze the idea, let's look at the motivation of the characters. Like let's really look at every split second of this story and go in depth and see how we can do more. And it's just a joke, basically, the thing. But just let's make sure that everything works. It's not. And what I really like working with Joost and Erik, that they have the same philosophy that I have. It's like it can always be better. You try to make it better, and is there a better idea? Yeah, well, let's not stick with the first thing. Let's try out a few things. This one is better, and keep working it. They're not. They don't satisfy themselves that easily, or and you have to push it, keep pushing it, keep plussing it. I like that, and that's why I really enjoy working with them. And the other one, this one is doing.
Yeah,
really
this
well.
is like called piece of art.
That's not.
Unframed of yeah.
Yeah, again, that was the same thing. They actually had an idea originally, and they got the green light on base of that. And then I saw it, and I said, "Yeah, it's not funny. That doesn't work at all." And they said, "Yeah, you just did it really fast." I said, "Okay." I said, "How much can we change so you still can use the money?" I said, "Well, even over there at the committee, they said, try to make it better." So okay, let's do that. So basically, we came up with an entirely different thing, which is this one, entirely different story. We're still with the same ingredients, still a guy who's trying to steal a painting, but and their their idea was to see it all from the point of view of the painting itself. But the whole story changed and plot, and it was technically much more difficult. That's all on their side, of course. Much more difficult than the first one because there's 3D in there and so on. But yeah, it was again. It was really enjoyable to go back and forth and back and forth. And these guys have great ideas, and they know how to plus.
That's the right. Hey, last question. We already had like a conversation. You say this is the golden age of animation.
Yeah. The second. Did I say that?
Yeah. You say it's the golden age of animation because so many demand on animation. Of course, a lot of like work circumstances should be improved. It should be much more inclusive. But on the same, there's like a huge demand on new productions because of all this streaming and stuff. So
it happened. There's so much new, and I honestly, what I said before, I can't keep up with it. There's, if you can watch something new every day, there's so much happening. But also, and that's not so much to do with the films, but more the people who work on it. I really. Nobody who's listening to it, who wants to work in the industry, can take my career as an example, because the way it happened to me is luck and timing and everything. It was thrown at me, it was presented to me in a silver platter. And I honestly think that if I, with my then capabilities, would try to break into the industry right now, I probably would not make it. And the reason is that when I and I thought, this is Grandpa telling you.
No, this is experience talking, not Grandpa. This is like experience talking.
But when I grew up, there was one book that was Preston Blair, and there was a book from the 20s from Lutz or something, and that was the Preston Blair book. And then I was 30 when, or something like that, when The Illusion of Life came out. And there was nothing. There was no internet. There were no DVDs or videos that had extras, or that there was nothing. So, but now in the last, especially, internet is only 20 years ago. That started to become mainstream, a little longer maybe. And but now there's so many ways to connect, and so many, especially, ways to learn, because everything is being parsed and being taken apart, and you can learn from it, and you can. Not only that, when I was up until I was, I think, 17 or something, I had seen maybe 5 Disney movies because they were not available. You couldn't get them on video. They were not on television. You had to wait until it came out in the theaters, and that would take a lot of time, and they were usually the same. So I saw maybe 5 Disney films until I was 17. And but now everything is available, and you can see that in the quality, the technical quality mostly of people who are younger than me. You know, there's so many, and in Holland too. There's so many terrific new talents. A bunch of them you interviewed already, that are working now, and they're amazing. There's a really high level draftsmanship. There's not a lot of story people. I think Dirk van Dolmen is one of the only ones in Holland who's really specializes in storyboarding. I might miss you. I don't know everybody, of course, but that's the only one on my radar. But yeah, the difference really with my career is now the first quality is much higher, I think. And I'm not talking about content, because that also takes life experience and other things, and that's kind of lacking. That younger people usually have on, you know, when they say an old movie, they're talking about Indiana Jones, you know, and you go, oh, that was last week, wasn't it? No, I mean, there's a whole history of films and theater and literature, and you know, that is unknown, and I think it's really worthwhile to take note of that, to actually to taste some of that, because it will add to your palette and to your keyboard, the size of your keyboard.
Yeah.
And,
but it's true that there are so many tutorials, and they learn you the craft or the principles, or like the, how do you say, how to use a technique or a software, and how to use light and texture and color, etc. But what I think, and I know you hate it, but hey, you're there behind the screen, so I'm safe. You're saying that you got your career on a silver platter, but then we go back to what you said before in the interview, and I think it's nice also to end this interview, because then we have this round circle of storytelling, is that you were telling about landscape is changing, but in a way you were able to adapt to that change, right? So you were like, there was this opportunity, you grabbed it, you worked for the best to it, and then there was this different thing called 3D, and you jumped into it, right? So even though you were not a 3D artist or whatever, you were involved with telling a story in 3D. So you were able to be part of that changes.
Yeah, but that part is easy, because I'm doing story. I'm a story guy. So story is story.
And that brings me back.
How to execute it.
And that brings me to the core, that it's all about the story. So that's why people like you are always very, very needed. Because in the end, it's about concept, it's because of good timing, it's entertaining for a large audience, because otherwise they don't get the money back, the investors, and that's part of the industry. So it should reach a big audience, and should relate to a big audience. And that is a different kind of skill than a tutorial online about figure drawing. And I think that core of storytelling, to know how far can you stretch it to have that final idea while throw away 1,000 others, I think that's a kind of a craftsmanship that comes through doing it a lot, not by a tutorial online, not by a book of Preston Blair, but just doing it a lot, being self-critical, and stretch it to the best possible. And I think that's the success of Kaching, but also the success of Wilbert Plijnaar. And that's not a silver platter.
Well, it was good timing, and you know, but it is exactly what you said, that I've come to realize that, you know, with experience comes knowledge. You know, you try everything out, and then a lot of that knowledge is unknown to people. Are, you know, what I really like after I retired 2 years ago, I'm doing the jobs here and there, the stuff that I like, but is story consulting, and I'm you know, I realize, well, there's some. You know, I'm doing now 2 things for Floor Adams on her new film Birdhouse, and on Sisters of the Mist of Toende
Studio Pupil.
Studio Pupil, yeah, and Marlene. I forgot her last name. And we still, but I wrote notes for that, and we still have to have our first Skype talk. But it was supposed to be today, but then I had this interview.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was my mistake. The last project I worked on until a few days ago was in 4 different time zones, so it was kind of confusing to keep it all going. But yeah, that's the part, that story consulting. Because it's like it comes easy to me. I sort of have an instinct for it. I always had, and even when I did comics, and it sort of developed over the years. And yeah, it is something like it's so easy. It's easy to help somebody in that way. Yeah. And I've got tons of drawing tips too, that things you learn. But you know what? There are so many thousands of people who can draw circles around me and who are much younger than me, because that's how that developed in the last 20 years, 10 years, right? Yeah.
Hey, technique can change, like medium can change, the landscape can change, but the core always stays a good concept and a landscape. Thank you so much, Wilbert, for sharing your knowledge, your experience, your time zone, sure. And also audience, don't forget to buy, no, it's not available anymore, but I'm trying to do a shout out for you. So this book is sold out. So it's a beautiful book about Wilbert's career and beautiful also his work in it, and it's sold out. So it's his first press, but I really want to have the publisher to do a second press. So let's gather all together and ask if there is possible to do a new press. That would be great. Thank you so much, Wilbert, for joining Playgrounds TV. I really, really hope once you will join us at the Playgrounds for real, physical, so that we can buy you a beer. Thank you, audience, for being with us and being so active in the chat. It was an honor to be here. And hopefully see you next time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.